Good evening, everybody. I'm Janetta Soshan, and I chair this meeting. Welcome to the meeting of the Planning Committee. Before the meeting starts, I have a few announcements to make. In the case of a fire, a bell will ring continuously. If this occurs, please leave the building immediately, following the green fire exit signs out to the assembly point, which is by the War Memorial in Duke Street. If anyone requires assistance, please let me know. Lifts should not be used. Please remain at the assembly point and do not attempt to return to the building until you've been advised it's safe to do so. The toilets are situated on the landing at the top of the main staircase and on the ground floor in the customer service area. And coming to filming of the meeting, if anyone attending this meeting is entitled to film it, but only councillors, officers and anyone sitting around these tables may be filmed. Members of the public should not be filmed, so please ensure cameras are only pointed in this direction. The meeting is also being broadcast via YouTube and recorded. When speaking, please may I remind the committee to ensure that you turn on the microphone and speak closely into it. A red light will appear on the middle button to indicate that your microphone is switched on. When finished speaking, please remember to turn your microphone off again. Right, apologies for absence, do we?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillors Papa and Wilson.
Right, thank you. Declarations of interest. All members are reminded they must disclose any interests they have in the items of business on the meeting's agenda, either at this point or as soon as they become aware of the interest. Moving on to the minutes. Minutes of the meeting on the 5th of December, which is quite a while ago. Is it your wish that I sign them? Agreed. Yeah, I think you've all agreed. Here? Thanks. Public question time. Are there any people who wish to speak at this point? Or?
Not at this point, just on the items.
Right, thank you. Right, I'll move straight on to item 6, Strategic Growth Site 7A, Molsham Hall Lane, Great Lees, Chelmsford, Essex. May I have the officer's report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the officer presentation is going to run through the proposal, which is the formation of the temporary construction vehicle access off Molsham Hall Lane. The officer presentation is going to run through some context just to give members a lead-in for not only this application but future applications related to the Great Lees Strategic Allocation Growth Site 7. So we move firstly to the wider context. The plan on the left is the allocations map. You'll see that the temporary access is identified in terms of its location with the arrow, but more widely, this application is related to Strategic Growth Site 7, which is Great Lees, and specifically Growth Site 7A, which is land off Molsham Hall Lane. I'll now briefly run on to some wider context of the application itself. So the top left-hand drawing, you see the blue star there is a replication of the allocation plan, but a more detailed version, and the star just represents the broad area of the temporary access. The right-hand side shows a location plan. Again, that's a zoomed-out version, which just shows the location along Molsham Hall Lane, and the bottom photograph is Molsham Hall Lane looking westwards. Again, the blue star represents the broad location of the temporary access. So the officer report does run through the wider plan applications related to 7A at the moment. They are currently pending consideration. So this temporary access is just a short short stretch into the field parcel, broadly in the location of an existing field gate. So this tended to bring forward development slightly earlier in terms of any field survey investigations, and ultimately it also allow part construction of the infrastructure that will be located in this location, which I'll run on to shortly. So that will allow an offline construction of the wider infrastructure. So as you see, this is an overlay of the spine application. Just run through this in a bit more detail. So the right-hand side, you'll see the road layout detail for both the full element of the hybrid application, which is with us at the moment, in terms of pending consideration. Not before us today, however. It'll detail full application for the spine road on its own. The roundabout, or the new roundabout, and the new access road into 7A is quite a substantial piece of infrastructure. The left-hand drawing, the main drawing on here, shows that overlay that you see on the right-hand side for the circular roundabout, but it does actually detail the overlay in grey of this temporary access. So you see that it's slightly offline to the main roundabout and the main road into the site. It does, however, encapsulate part of the cycleway footway that will travel northwards along Morsham Hall Lane. This is just to demonstrate that there is some slight crossover. There is a condition that requires, that seeks to restrict simultaneous use, because in effect, it shouldn't really happen in terms of both these accesses being used at the same point, and that's not its intention either. Just to give a view of one of the key issues within the report, members will be aware that there is a green sheet amendment just to identify that this oak tree, category A oak tree, does require removal. The green sheet acknowledges that this is not a preserved tree, so that's just to outline to members this tree is not preserved as part of the wider TPO just north of the new access here. So this tree, category A oak, it's in decent condition and obviously has some presence in the street scene. So its loss is regrettable, but the officer report does detail that because of the overlay I showed previously, that this oak tree would be lost as part of the eventual proposals anyway. So in effect, the loss is brought forward in months in terms of a potential permission for the eventual spine road. However, ultimately, once that if the application gets approved, then the wider works will envelop this tree in any event. We did look at seeking to maintain that tree, but it's just not feasible in terms of the new roundabout layout. So the report acknowledges that, and it also acknowledges that there are some tree protection measures for trees north of the site as well. Just running through the planning considerations as seen in the officer report. So the principle is acceptable because this is within the revised defined settlement for Great Lees as part of the wider allocation. Its visual impact, at the end of the day, it's a tarmac driveway extending into this field. It's acceptable on the basis that it's required as an offline solution to enable works, wider works within this vicinity. This will be an area, obviously the lane is very pleasant at the moment. This will be subject to change, and the report acknowledges that it will be subject to change, and this is a minor visual impact in respect to the wider works that will go ahead in the future. Highway safety, highways recommended approval subject to a number of conditions. Those conditions are slightly modified, but you'll see that there are highways conditions in the in the officer report. The bridleway 13, which is also acknowledged in the report, is not directly impacted by the proposal. It doesn't fall within the application site. It falls just shy south of the application site, so that's not impacted. The construction traffic plan associated with the application details that there will be banksmen available so that any use of that by pedestrians or horses can be mitigated in the short term. There are wider works associated with the hybrid and the full, sorry, the outline and the full applications as part of the wider works to extend the bridleway loop in any event. In terms of trees, obviously the report acknowledges that the loss is regrettable of the category A tree to fine specimen. However, this is acceptable in the circumstances given that the wider works will essentially require the removal of that tree in any event. So in summary, members, the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions that you see in the report. Thank you, Chair. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. We'll go to Joseph Daniels, who wishes to speak. By the way, sorry, just before you do, can I just check that everyone's seen the green sheet? Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Daniels, but great for you.
Is that okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak, and good evening, members. I don't wish to take up too much of the committee's time. However, I've chosen to speak because although this is a relatively minor planning application, it is nevertheless extremely important because it will shorten the development programme and enable the earlier delivery of market and affordable homes at Strategic Growth Site 7A. As the officer rightly explained, the reason for this application, and the reason we are asking for it to be determined now, is because it will more efficiently facilitate the construction of the main roundabout and the spine road, which will in turn enable the wider development to proceed, subject to the approval of those separate applications. Additionally, there are a number of highways-related technical approvals and other agreements that need to be entered into with Essex County Council. These can only begin following the granting of planning permission. Should members grant permission this evening, we will commence that process with Essex County Council straight away. However, we still expect it to take approximately 6 months before any of the permitted works will begin on site. However, the alternative would be a far more significant delay to the overall development programme, which we already estimate at approximately 10 years start to finish. Essentially, we are seeking to remove avoidable delays from the programme. The earlier the temporary access can be formed, the shorter the overall construction programme for the entire development will be, and the sooner the homes, the neighbourhood centre, the school, nursery, and all of the other improvements proposed at Strategic Growth Site 7A will be delivered. And of course, the inevitable disruption that this will cause will be reduced also. Working with officers, we have amended the proposals in response to Essex County Council feedback, and there are no objections from consultees, the parish council, or neighbours. Bridleway 13 will be unaffected, and we will be introducing a new speed limit of 30 miles per hour on Moulsham Hall Lane from the entrance to the roundabout. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will support the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Right, was there anything you wanted to add at this point, or shall I go straight to the members?
Happy to go straight to members.
Okay.
Chair.
Okay, I'll open it to members. Who would like to start? Any questions?
Thank you, Chair. Would the officers confirm their judgment as to whether overall environmentally this is a net positive or a net negative application?
I think it's fair to say, members, that I would deem it to be neutral in the respect of there is the loss of a tree. However, those works will facilitate the quicker process of more hard, larger infrastructure. So I think that my view would be neutral. We have to recognise that there is the loss of a tree and there is some hard surfacing to go in as part of this application. But that this is a scheme situated within the new defined settlement boundary, where such development, urbanised development, is acceptable as a matter of principle, and ultimately this will be a temporary solution, albeit perhaps more than 12 months, as the application details say. So that in essence, this area, I talked about the simultaneous element. This area facilitates works as a solution. Once members see the applications that are at the moment in front of you, this can then form part of a landscaped area through future applications. So I would deem it as neutral on the basis that there is some short-term pain in essence in terms of ecology, natural environment, but however this will improve through future applications which are also within our control.
Can you possibly swap microphones, please?
Sorry, Chair, is that any better, do you think?
I think so.
Thank you.
Right. I've suddenly realised I've forgotten to bring in our... No, you're on the second item. Sorry, second. I'll leave it to you. Carry on then, please. Anybody else wants to speak? Yep, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Carrying on from Councillor Thompson's comments, in theory, we should be having biodiversity net gains in applications. I appreciate the circumstances for this one, and that in theory it will be mitigated in future applications. What is the mechanism to record this and make sure it is in conditions for the future applications? And from that, if future applications don't come forward or they're refused, how do we go back and mitigate for the loss of trees in this case? If that makes any sense, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the query. In terms of this, I'll deal with the last one first. In terms of mitigation of tree, the office report has to acknowledge that the the application red line boundary is relatively tightly drawn around the works that are required as part of this. So the office report has to acknowledge that the opportunity for replacement planting, which one may usually seek for the loss of such a tree, is limited by the boundaries of the application site. It would also potentially prejudice any future landscaping that may come forward. So I think that would be the point on this specific application in terms of replacement tree. Obviously, officers could look, if members were so minded, if that was an issue outstanding, but the officer recommendation at the moment is not to seek a replacement of this tree. Also bear in mind that the tree, whilst a good category, is not preserved in its own right, so could in theory be felled by the landowner at any given point. Obviously, an application before us gives the local planning authority some control over things like replacement planting in that case. In terms of the broader question about replacements in future, I think that without second guessing where a future plan application will go, obviously members need to bear in mind that even if the application that's live with us at the moment in terms of the hybrid as well as the spine road, even if that were not successful, there is still the fact that this remains an allocated site and it's allocated for growth. So, you know, the council has accepted development will happen in this location in principle, and as I've said before, has extended the defined zone and boundary. So I think I would say to members on this specific question that we can deal with this matter. Obviously, this application is minuted as part of this presentation, and you know, I'm sure, I say as part of that minuting, the members can hopefully have some confidence that officers as well as members can be brought to attention in terms of future considerations of the hybrid or the spine road application in the future at committees. I hope that answers your query, Councillor.
Okay. Moving on. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. As the following applications haven't come in yet, the point on that the roundabout will inevitably remove the tree, I'm unclear if we can fully factor that. I appreciate that's what it appears like it will inevitably be, but the application isn't in for that yet. Therefore, because that's not the planning application in front of us, the roundabout could in theory be redesigned to have the tree as the placemaker in the centre of the roundabout to accommodate it. So the point that it's disappointing to lose something so old and such a placemaker that's currently there is slightly disappointing. I do appreciate that a good construction entrance access is really important and can have positive environmental benefits in prevention of materials coming out onto the highways, in making it clear and preventing congestion and traffic near roundabouts. So I appreciate a really important construction site access will be beneficial for future development, and I don't want to take away from that. However, with what's presented to us, was it clear that the tree inevitably had to come out and there was an option to remove the smaller hedge or shrubs, just to think it's to the east of it or to the north of it, the other side?
Thank you, James. I'm just going to pull up a plan, if I may, just to aid this discussion. So there's a couple of elements that I want to address from that particular query. In terms of the last point, in terms of is there anything lesser, I think that I'd have to acknowledge that the application was submitted initially without the loss of this tree. The office report acknowledges that based upon a highways an informal consultation response, in essence, the access was required to be widened. So the grey zone that you see here wasn't originally that wide at first submission, back at the point of submission of this application. So it was widened at the request of the Highway Authority. Obviously, that's not something that we as a local planning authority take lightly. However, that was to necessitate the ability for HDVs to exit and entry simultaneously. So that, in effect, is a highway safety reason. Now we, as planning authority, have to balance that requirement with essentially what I'm saying to you is the early loss of this tree. So I think I would make that point in fairness to the applicant, that they sought to retain this tree for however many months this temporary access is in place before the wider works are commenced as part of any future planning permission. So I think I have to acknowledge that first, and this was a highway safety matter in terms of its widening that resulted in loss. So that's the first point I would make. In terms of the wider point about, I think Councillor made about placemaking, obviously, in our experience, we will try and keep such good quality trees where we can. Obviously, in essence, officers are asking members almost to have a confidence in its officers in something like this, in that this application, obviously I've been case officer for several years, has been subject to a master plan and obviously and also pre-application negotiations that are not in the public domain. So obviously our starting point would be, this is a good tree. We have explored, or I've explored with highways and with the consortium of applicants here. It would be great in an ideal world for this tree to be a placemaker in the centre of the island, for example, as you might see Bewley or other places. However, I think we need to bear in mind that there are restrictions in terms of the proximity of this mini roundabout to the roundabout that you see on the 131. So there's various highway standards that have to be met in terms of, in terms of queuing distance, for example, for cars, in terms of deflection, in terms of visibility display. So there's only, whilst I take the councillor's point that this is not necessarily the absolute final agreed design of the roundabout, it is a solution that's put forward, as you see from the context applications in the officer report at section 2. We have a hybrid application for up to 800 units. That includes a full element that does include the detail that you see on the right-hand side, as well as a separate plan application for the spine road, a separate full application which replicates that full element of the hybrid application. So I think in terms of certainty, it has been designed to a certain degree to be in this location. This may well be subject to some change in terms of highways requirements about the visibility, deflection rates, the proximity of this roundabout to another. But in essence, this has been scoped out over a number of years. I think is the point I'm trying to get across to members, that whilst the actual design on the ground might change several metres here and there, the broad location of this roundabout is pretty much set. The location of the pedestrian cycle route to extend the bridleway northwards, that type of thing is pretty much set as well. So that becomes a binary decision then at future applications, whether that's acceptable to us as a local planning authority in terms of highway safety, in terms of all the material considerations in play. So, as I say, the office report doesn't take this point lightly, but I would just acknowledge that, again, that this is not a preserved tree. It needs to be factored into that point of view. And I think that stepping back even further with regard to the context, obviously, I did display the wider site allocation. I think that as part of our discussion when we as the council allocate such sites, there is a recognition that there is some environmental disbenefit in terms of hedgerows lost, in terms of tree loss. And you know, when the 7A application is presented to members, hopefully within this calendar year, you'll see that there is tree loss associated with that as well. And sometimes it is an inevitability of a development of a mixed-use scheme, 800 units, mixed-use elements, schools, etc., that we need to have buildings and roads within these field parcels. So there is an inevitability that there is some localised damage. Obviously, we have in place biodiversity net gain and things and planning policies that will seek to gain from that, so that hopefully there is a plus to that. But I think that in essence, this is a very limited application, I think is my point, and it's part of a wider context that obviously members can debate at future applications.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Right, in that case, I think I'll go to a vote. That the application for strategic growth zone 7A in this particular case be approved for the reasons and conditions on page 5 and 6. Do I have a seconder? I do. In that case, all those in favour? Yeah, I think we're doing fine. Yes, thank you. None against, I assume. Thank you. We'll move on then straight away to item 7, which is permission in principle, land adjacent White Cottage, South Street, Great Waltham. It'll take a couple of minutes to sort this out. Okay, when you're ready.
Well, yeah, thank you, Chair. So this application seeks approval for the construction of a dwelling house under the application called Permission in Principle. The Permission in Principle route has 2 stages. The first stage establishes whether a site is suitable to obtain permission in principle, and the second stage considers more technical details, including appearance, access, and other details. This proposal in front of the committee is at the first stage of the consideration, which seeks approval for the construction of 1.5 or a 2-story dwelling house with associated parking spaces, garage, and garden areas. In terms of the location, the application site lies outside the defined settlement of Great Waltham, as indicated on the map by a red line. It falls within the conservation area, which is indicated by a blue line and dots on the map. There's also a number of listed buildings adjacent to the site. These are shown in blue. The map also shows the public paths around the village in orange. The application site is mostly rectangular in form and lies adjacent to South Street. There is an existing field access, currently gated. It is indicated by a star on the map. The application site does not contain any buildings. It is enclosed by mature trees and hedge, which are an integral part of the street scene and the character of the area. Trees are protected by the conservation area designation. There's also a protected tree adjacent to the east side of the application site, indicated in green on the map. It is outside the application site. So in terms of the proposal, Planning Policy DM8 sets out those types of development that are acceptable in a rural area. The only criteria that is relevant in this case is whether the application site forms an infill plot. As it can be seen from the aerial image here, the site is much wider than other residential plots within the village, and it is not within an otherwise built-up frontage. The built-up frontage clearly ends with White Cottage on the east of the site, and then reappears at Southlands west of South House. The space between these two houses is over 100 meters. Therefore, the proposal fails to comply with the policy requirement for an infill plot. The proposed development would also impact the visual amenity of the area. The site is enclosed by vegetation, which positively contributes to the character of the area. A large part of this green foliage will be removed to accommodate the proposed development. Any new house would need to be provided with safe access to the site, which means that a substantial amount of hedge and trees will be removed along South Street to provide adequate visibility space. The proposal would change the undeveloped appearance of the site, which would be harmful to the character of the street. In addition, the application site lies within the rural area, as mentioned, and the change to the site would also impact the visual amenity of the countryside outside the village boundary. The rural character of the site would be degraded by urbanizing the plot with proposed development. And therefore, Council considers that the proposal would fail to preserve the character of the countryside beyond the village envelope too. There also be harm to the character of the conservation area from the proposed development. This site is currently very visible from 4 different approaches: from South Street, east to west and west to east, from Duffrys Close, and from Cherry Gardens Road. From the 4 approaches, the site currently gives an open and green setting and views over the agricultural land to the south of the village. By enclosing this site with a new residential development, the character of the conservation area would be fundamentally harmed. Also, the application site forms a part of the setting of South House, which is a Grade 2 listed building. Historically, the application site was a part of an orchard associated with South House. Whilst there are currently no individually exceptional trees on the site, the existing native banjo treatments and mature trees add to the historic character and setting of this house. The land currently provides an open setting adjacent to the drive to this listed building, and it is considered to be an important feature as it adds to the status of the approach and provides separation between South House and the tightly developed areas around it. So a new building, a garage parking area, and the need for visibility space and domestic paraphernalia would all have an adverse impact on the setting of this listed building. This harm could not be reasonably or adequately replaced or mitigated given the proposed function of the site. So given the proposed change, the proposal would be harmful to the setting of the listed building too. Considering policy DM13, the impact of any development proposal on the significance of a designated heritage asset or its setting, and the level of any harm needs to be considered against any public benefits arising from the proposed development. As part of the application, it was stated that the site is currently being used for antisocial activities, which would cease with the construction of the new house. The council, however, does not consider that this justification for the development would outweigh the harm to the heritage assets. It also should be noted that a similar type of proposals were refused twice before for 1.5 and 2-story houses. Of a particular relevance and a material planning consideration is the 2010 proposal, which was dismissed at appeal. The inspector concluded that the proposed development would not preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area and would adversely impact on the setting of the Grade 2 listed building, South House. So in conclusion, the principle of development on this site is not acceptable as the site is outside the defined settlement boundary and it does not form an infill plot. There will be harm to the character of the rural area, the conservation area, and harm to the setting of South House. Also, the application does not contain any information to demonstrate that there are no protected species or habitats within the site. In the absence of adequate ecological information, the application fails to demonstrate that there would be no harm arising from the proposed development. That's all, thank you.
Right, thank you. Now we have someone who wishes to speak. Lily Bartella.
Firstly, good evening and thank you very much for hearing us out on this proposal. So the land along South Street, Great Waltham, is owned and maintained by my client, Stephanie Dodwell. Any future development on this site would be a benefit for Steph personally, allowing her to downsize into this property, making best use of the land and its location within the village. This ensures a large property become available for a family with a large garden that Steph currently lives in along Barrack Lane, while Steph can remain in the village of which she has spent the majority of her life. In regards to the mention of the maintenance and of the character and beauty of the area in question, can be questioned in regards to the land, as although not officially reported, however suffered a lot by my client, the site has been used for many years as a dumping ground, a tip for many items, a motorcycle, bikes, multiple bottles, as well as unsolicited substances, to name but a few. Steph, who works a full-time job as well as looking after her family, has cleared the site herself each time to maintain the beauty of the area. However, this should not occur on her site, especially as it causes great harm to the look and feel of the conservation area. However, despite putting up a new wooden gate when the previous one was destroyed, as well as signage on the property, she still experiences the same level of mess and rubbish over her site, affecting any level of habitat or wildlife nature that could occur. She will not be able to maintain clearing this. The site is then likely to be able to become overgrown, full of rubbish, something that would be removed as an issue if this principle of development is agreed. The addition of a dwelling here would deter the youths who are using the site as a place for gatherings and dumping rubbish. This rubbish on the site surely adds to the negative impact on the neighbouring listed buildings, of which we ensure will be addressed if the principle of development is approved. We are willing to work closely with the council to provide a design for an in-keeping dwelling subservient to those around it, with a vivid character to match the area, a cottage-style feel with aspects from the neighbouring White Cottage and South House. As part of an ecology consideration, Steph, the landowner, has a key love for ecology and species, ensuring that at the design stage, the trees, habitats, hedgerows will all be added in to fulfil the site. Within the last 6 months, she's also been contacted by large housing developers to create the site as an access road for development beyond, something of which would surely impact our conservation area. In conclusion, we trust you see our willingness to comply with the council's ideologies for any such development on this site, working together between us and the council to create an in-keeping, architecturally interesting and compliant dwelling for the use of my client as a downsizing property. We thank you for the time to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mike.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a couple of slides, I think, haven't I, Dan?
You have.
It's unusual, but if you'll forgive me. so I'm the ward councillor, and I've asked for this application to be brought to planning committee because I wholeheartedly believe that there is a case for a small dwelling on this site. Right. In my opinion, the site is an anomaly. So South Street has dwellings on both sides. As you go down from the junction, as you go from north to south from the junction with Chelmsford Road and towards Breed Road over to the left. The settlement boundary and the conservation area boundary are on the right-hand side there on that diagram, and they are both together, and they go down. And in fact, they go past the back of my house, which is over on the right just before you get to the bottom corner, and then they go left down South Street, and then they diverge when they get to this site, and the conservation boundary carries on. But the settlement boundary comes into the road, goes round this site, goes round the garden of South House, and then comes back out again and goes around the back of the houses and carries on down South Street to Rollsbridge Road, where there are houses on both sides. So, whilst I recognise it's outside the boundary of the defined settlement area and within the conservation area, because of the unusual path, which includes all the dwellings on the road except this one, in my opinion, adding a suitable dwelling to this site, and I do mean suitable, would not detract from the area, the character of the area, and the flow of housing down that site. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is looking actually not far from where I live, because I can see this from my office window. So, in my view, the character of this road is set by this white cottage, which is two semi-detached cottages. And then what the applicant is doing is the land beyond that to have something similar. And then you flow on down towards South House and all the other houses down South Street. I think the next picture, please, of the front of this site, which at the moment is gated because it's being used basically as a bit of a dumping ground and a bit of a antisocial behaviour area. So it's not serving a useful purpose at the moment. And the major opposition seems to be the anomalous boundaries and the impact on the hedges and the trees to facilitate a road entrance. I just don't see why a suitable application can't be worked out to address these factors. I don't think the development will adversely impact on the identified intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside. The planning department say that the development would not respect the existing village layout and would result in erosion to the rural character of the southern side of South Street with the addition of a further residential property. I don't believe that to be true. And I say that as a resident of Great Waltham, and actually being able to see the site from my house and my office window. We feel in Great Waltham that we're kind of being dictated to here, that we're being protected from ourselves. We need more smaller houses in Great Waltham. We're not part of the local plan of housing, and we are short of such small houses. And perhaps this isn't a traditional infill, because whilst it's outside the settlement boundary, the dwellings either side are inside the settlement boundary, which makes it a bit of a strange concept. Great Waltham Parish Council have no objections to this application. I don't believe it contravenes their village design statement, which includes provisions for a new residential development for a small number of new dwellings, sympathetic infill development, modest edge of village development, 2-bedroom starter homes. Indeed, actually, Great Waltham Parish Council did carry out a housing needs survey and did establish the requirement for 1- and 2-bedroom houses, which this would meet. If there's a concern about biodiversity, I believe there's new regulations coming in where planning applicants have to prove an increase in biodiversity. So I would hope that would get worked into any actual full application. Of course, any development needs to be appropriate to the setting and the fact it is inside the conservation area. I think granting a PIP would allow the applicant to work with City Council planning to establish an acceptable dwelling and at the same time boost the number of small dwellings in Great Waltham, which is much needed. I asked the planning department to find a way so that an acceptable dwelling can be built on this site. And my final statement is that I just don't comprehend why there is so much opposition to an application like this to add needed development with no objections from residents or Great Waltham Parish Council or myself as City Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the officer like some to be able to come back before we go to the committee?
Yes. The main comment that I would probably want to add is that every application needs to be determined in accordance with our policies, and one of the policies that we have is about development in the rural area, and this site is outside the village boundary, so it is within rural area, and we have considered the proposal, and the only possible way was the infill. However, we dismissed it because of the reasons presented in the presentation. So the gap is too large to be considered a regular infill plot in the built-up frontage. There was also comments about the proposal being a small house, 2-bedroom. I believe that we will not have any influence in terms of what can be proposed on the site. So this application is only for principle on it, and all the details will come later, at a later date. And whether the house will be 2-bedroom or 3 or 4 bedrooms, we not always have the power to influence that. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, did you want anything to add? If not, I'll go to the committee. Yep, okay. I'll move on to the committee then. Who would like to start? Councillor Tron.
Thank you. I'm not clear. Is this a standalone piece of land, or is it part of South Cottage? Have I referenced the right property? I'm just trying to get clear, you know, is this a single piece of land that is not linked, associated with any of the land around it? I can't quite work out why there is this piece of land there.
No, we don't have any plans. So historically, this land is associated with South House, which is listed building. And historically, it was part of an orchard that is shown on some historic maps. Whether the land is now sold and owned by somebody else, that is not particularly clear.
Okay.
But that it's part of the association with the listed building, so it's not just
Madam Chairman, can I raise a point of order? I don't want the committee to be misled. This is a separate piece of land. It used to be part of South House. It is now a separate piece of land.
It honestly...
Separately owned.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually matter, does it? In terms of an application, that is irrelevant who it belongs to at the moment, so I'm agreeing. Yeah, okay, sorry, Claire. Yes, please, sorry, Ashley Thompson, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting your name, I don't know why. Apologies.
I'm very forgettable, Madam Chairman. Like my mobile phone, that's very forgettable as well. First of all, I just wanted to make a general comment. I've only been a councillor since May, and this is the second time now that I've come across a situation where it could be argued that our current policies in rural areas come across to the residents as actually maybe a bit too picky, a bit too restrictive. Nevertheless, they are our policies as things as things currently stand, there are other forums in which we can, look at what our policies are. I note the Councillor Steele and the applicant are, trying to make quite sort of conciliatory, noises towards, let's find some way of making a sensitive development possible. But can I just be clear that the position of the officers is that no amount of sensitivity makes development acceptable on this site? Is that the position of the officers, or am I putting words in your mouth?
I don't think you're putting words in our mouth, Councillor Thompson. The officer report makes reference to the appeal decision back in 2010. I know 2010 is some years ago now, but it is a material planning consideration, and it is still very, very relevant to this application, because every issue that the inspector in 2010 dismissed the appeal on, for one quite attractive house, I think we showed you the image of the two properties. There's nothing wrong with those in terms of attractive houses in a village, but outside the defined settlement, contrary to policy, harm to conservation area, harm to setting of listed building, they're all the same issues. Nothing has changed in planning policy terms significantly for us to come to a different position. So in officers' view, even a really well-designed house here is still going to have the same harmful impact on planning policy, conservation area, listed building, and also now we've got the issue here with not having done the ecology information up front. So we would talk to them if we could, but we can't as planning officers. It's a straight back from our advice to you on where we are.
Right, thank you. Yes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask, that's pretty clear, by the way, but I just wanted to ask about the objections, because there wasn't any local objection by the sounds of it to this development. I'm just wondering in this case, and again, I'm a new councillor as well, so seeking guidance here. When you showed the picture, there was obviously property that was opposite, older buildings that were opposite. Would you seek some kind of written or even verbal sort of clarity on whether that person objects to it? Because obviously they're directly opposite the site. So I'm just wondering whether that is done formally and asked, because some people don't make a comment, do they, at all on planning? They just don't. They don't register either a support or an objection. But given that, given the circumstances, I would have thought, you'd want to ask those people what they actually felt about it.
We don't go canvassing people's opinions on any planning application. We'd get nothing else done. I think if we did that, we advertise. If people comment, they comment. But planning decisions, as you know, aren't based on whether we receive an objection or a letter of support. No. We base them on planning policies. It's not a referendum in terms of making a decision.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you. Can you turn your mic off, please? Sorry, Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I've got every sympathy with villages who desperately need small properties, etc., and that's the similar story right the way through. We or the planning committee and the officers have to go back to the policy, the local plan and the national policy. If it doesn't conform to that, then we really have to determine in the basis of the local plan. And in this particular case, as has been proved by various refusals and also a failed appeal, it cannot be approved because it is outside of the DSB. Now, I know the DSB can be changed with local plan review, and that is maybe something that the applicant might be looking towards doing, but as it stands at the moment, it doesn't conform with policy, and I believe this committee should refuse the application, and I fully support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Large.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say something quite similar. So I think it's quite clear that the application as it stands, there's many reasons for refusing it based on our policies. And if we were to go against our policies, that would be setting a really bad precedent for other applications to come in. So I agree with the refusal, and if the applicant and all councillors want to try and change the policies through the local plan review, then that would be, I would suggest, maybe way forward. Whether or not it happens, I don't know. But at the moment, the policy is such that it has to be refused.
Thank you. I have two more councillors, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've been on this committee a while now, and we tend to only assess the plans that are put before us, not a development plan that seems to be spoken about today. In the pack, page 22, item 7 talks, page 3 on item 7, talks about point 3. There are no plans before us here. There are no the 2 or 3 bedroom plan or a 1.5 or a 2-storey plan. It's totally unclear if this development is to support an affordable home or an executive home offering. I looked today at the detached prices, house prices in Waltham fetching £600,000. So affordable, in my opinion, would be a stretch. I also looked at the pack, page 30, item 7, page 11, where the officer says, within reason 2, the officers state, this is actually increasing urban character at the cost of rural character and natural beauty. And as others have said before, that's against our policies. The question really arises for me is there any area of brownfield site locally that this idea could be developed on? So instead, thank you.
Thank you. Let's be clear, prices are not really part of our remit. Sorry.
One note that I'd make, I appreciate that the boundaries are unusual how they do merge, but if anything, considering the listed building adjoining, it's a shame almost that the adjoining barns and farmlands and those heritage buildings aren't included within the settlement boundary. Within the conservation area. Doesn't mean that necessarily a property couldn't be built in a conservation area, as many often are, but it just, on the heritage side and the conservation area, although it's it feels unusual that it's just in, because it's got the listed building next to it, it feels almost right that it is.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you for allowing me to come back in. I think if it were just a question of whether this is infill or not, we might be able to have a reasoned debate here that it's not strictly speaking, but you can see the you could see the argument, there's house opposite, things like that. So if that was the only principle before me, I think it might be a bit more of a nuanced discussion. But as Councillor Large has just pointed out, the sheer number of reasons for the refusal, I can't get past because conservation areas, I was councillor before in Southend for a ward with a large conservation area, they're so sensitive to change, aren't they, and to development, that an exaggerated level of protection is given to such sites. And it's not that I don't have emotional sympathy with some of the things that have been said from that end of the room. Of course, we're in a housing crisis. So if it were marginal, I might be tempted to sort of say, well, there is a need for housing, it's marginal, there's only one reason refusal, can we get around that? But there's just too much here, and I think that's probably the view the committee's going to come to, that there's just too many reasons for refusal in this case.
All right, thank you. Well, unless anybody else wants to speak, I will take it to a vote. I move that 23-01916 PIP permission in principle land adjacent White Cottage be refused for the reasons on page 10 up to reason 4 on page 12 because we have cut out reason 5. Do I have a seconder? I do. In that case, all those in favour? Thank you. I think we're unanimous again. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for those who have checked, but there are other ways that maybe could be looked at. Thank you. Right, we still have planning appeals, of course, and there are some interesting ones there, so please have a look in your own good time. Thank you, and that way I shall close the meeting.